as you can imagine, our aim from the German consumer organization more generally in consumers should be able to buy as easily online in the single market than as they should. As already mentioned by Prabhat, why are cross-border purchases important? At the moment, of course, the COVID pandemic plays an important role. Online purchases are gaining more traction, also cross-border purchases. We see very clear indications in consumer preferences that consumers do want to shop online cross-border, both directly from web shops and also mediated via online platforms. And I also like to add here that if we look at the bigger market structure, so to say, or structure of where do EU citizens live, we nowadays have roughly 10 million EU citizens that do not live in their home country. Given the fact that this is the size of, you can see that this is quite a tangible number of people who live, so to say, abroad in the single market. So before the geo-blocking regulation came into force, consumer organizations often received multitude of complaints regarding the well-known cases on leisure parks, on car rentals, holiday package travels. And maybe to remind you, but I think also Róża Thun and Andrus Ansip made it quite clear that consumers legitimately expect that they can buy goods and services freely in the EU's internal market. And when this is refused, many fear that the EU internal market is still there mostly for businesses that have the freedom of establishment, create companies, subsidiaries elsewhere in the single market, but that consumers are dependent on traders accepting to sell and to deliver to their country. So this is why we supported quite strongly the geo-blocking regulation, also given the fact that before it was coming into force, we saw quite a high number of web shops that applied different parts of geo-blocking, as Andrus Ansip already mentioned. And we also see that the geo-blocking regulation in that respect had an effect, that the Commission did this second round of a mystery shopping, showing that a couple of months after coming into force of the regulation, the numbers dropped from 63% of geo-blocking measures down to 10%. So there seemingly regulation is working, though there is still to do furthermore. What we praise, of course, is enshrining the principle of non-discrimination in the single market, the access of single market, and of course the end of rerouting practices and a non-discrimination of payment services. But when we now look at we take the outlook and look what is further needed, of course, consumers have more expectations towards a consumer-friendly digital single market than what the regulation actually can deliver. So maybe to give, first of all, what we still see, despite numbers going down of geo-blocking measures, that there is still a lack of enforcement and implementation by traders. The German Federal Network Agency, who in Germany is in force or is in charge of enforcing the regulation, showed that in the past year they received more than 100 complaints. Thankfully, all could be resolved amicably so far, but it's matters of concern. Apparently not all traders implemented the geo-blocking regulation yet. There are still complaints about rerouting, about consumers needing national mobile phone numbers, national bank accounts, or social security numbers. And also there have been reports that due to the regulation, traders with web shops in different countries suddenly changed their terms and conditions after coming into force of the geo-blocking regulation in order to prevent shipping goods in the whole of the EU, which they did apparently before the geo-blocking regulation. So there is still a matter of further implementation and also enforcement being important from our perspective. Also, a part of many complaints from the consumer side is, of course, the expectation of cross-border delivery, which was already mentioned. This is, of course, a very stringent consumer expectation in order to also fully open competition inside the single market. Like to see more movement. And of course, when we look at the Commission's review, it would be also very interesting for us to see how consumer prices have developed after coming into force of the regulation, because in 2015 or 16, there were estimations about lower prices and benefits of 2.4 billion euros per year. And it would be very interesting to us to know how this price structure changed due to the regulation. And of course, finally, the question of audiovisual services is also quite an important one for us, but I'm sure that David will talk more about this from the consumer perspective. So far, thank you.